Welcome to Chapter 7 in our Self-Directed Behavior book, which is our Self-Change Project book. This chapter is on consequences, and I think when people think of the word consequences, they kind of use it or think of it as being synonymous with punishment. And that's not at all what we mean here. A consequence is simply just the result of some event or of something happening. And so you can think of if this were a cause and effect relationship, you could think of consequences being the effect of something else. So it's not necessarily always bad or good. So the reason it's important to understand that consequences do not mean punishment, they don't always mean something bad, is because we want to start looking at your quote-unquote bad behavior and figuring out the consequence of doing your bad behavior. And that consequence might feel good in the way that if I bought a lottery ticket and the consequence was that I won, that would feel really good. And so it's said that we don't engage in our bad behavior unless there is something that feels good about doing it, unless there is some type of positive consequence. And I don't mean positive as in like this is healthy for you necessarily, but positive in that it feels good or you wouldn't be doing it. So we need to identify the consequences of doing our bad behavior so that we can take what feels good and rearrange it to reinforce our new good behaviors that we're going to do instead of our bad behaviors. So the goals of this chapter are to find out what is reinforcing your undesirable behavior, what feels good about doing your bad behavior. Another goal is to learn how to rearrange reinforcement to reinforce your good behavior only and not your bad behavior. And then finally, we want to learn techniques to reinforce our desired behavior. So those techniques are basically going to consist of how to reward yourself when you do your good behavior, and your project does require you to use reinforcement or to use rewards on your desired behavior. So just as kind of a fun fact on the side, studies show that you are 3 times more likely to succeed at doing your good behavior if you reward yourself. So it's studies like that are the reason that you're going to be using rewards in your project. So if we want to rearrange the reinforcers of our bad behavior to instead reinforce our good behavior, then the first thing we have to do is discover those reinforcers, the things that feel good about doing our bad behavior. Like I said earlier, if you eat a cupcake, it tastes good. That's a positive consequence of eating the cupcake. It doesn't mean the cupcake's healthy for you. We don't mean good in that way, but we do mean good in that it feels good to eat that cupcake, and that's why you're doing it. So how can we identify those reinforcers of our bad behavior? Really, the best way to do so is just with direct observation. So we use direct observation to figure out what is reinforcing our undesired behavior or our quote-unquote bad behavior. And sometimes you can't really see your reinforcer. You can't figure out what it is that is rewarding your bad behavior. So you can't intervene to stop or rearrange it. And this can be due to intermittent reinforcement schedules like we talked about in Chapter 4, delayed reinforcement, and avoidance behavior. And in this case, you don't really need to identify what your reinforcers for your bad behavior is. You just instead will focus on developing reinforcers for desired behaviors. So we're all going to have to develop rewards for our desired behaviors, and one of the ways that we can do this is with what's called the Premack principle. So the Premack principle is defined as taking any activity that you're likely to perform and use it to reinforce any behavior that you are less likely to perform. So if you like to take long baths, you would use the Premack principle to make that bath a reinforcer. And the way you would do that is by not taking a bath unless you do your good behavior. So it's a reward for your good behavior. It could be anything though. If you really like cookies, you can't eat cookies until you do your good behavior. I had a student one time that wanted to use sex with his girlfriend as his reward, and he wanted to do that using the Premack principle. So he was gonna not have sex with his girlfriend unless he did his good behavior. but he quickly changed his mind on using that as his reward. It took like 3 days, and he was in my office telling me that one wasn't going to work. So anyways, the pre-MAC principle is just taking anything and that you enjoy and using it as a reward for your good behavior, but it is contingent on doing the good behavior. So you don't get it unless you actually do the good behavior, whatever the reward is that you choose. So whatever the reward is, it should be something that you could stand to lose temporarily, but you would be disappointed if you lost it. So not like it would really set you back if you didn't have this reward. So I wouldn't suggest it be something like, I can't drive my car unless I do my good behavior. That's maybe going to make your life really difficult, so we wouldn't want to do that one. But it should be something that we would be upset if we lost it. So a little bothered by it and make our life a little more or a little less convenient, you know. So as long as it's something kind of in the balance there, it would be a good reward using the pre-MAC principle. Okay, so let's put this all into practice for lecture activity 1. So let's say that you are going to be working on increasing the amount of studying you're doing for your self-change project. Let's say that was your goal. And so you are going to try to discover what is reinforcing the behavior of not studying. And the way you're going to discover that reinforcer is by using direct observation, like we just talked about. So in one event, you realize that when you go to the library to study, you are there for 45 minutes, but you're really only studying for 15 minutes. So for lecture activity number 1, I would like for you to answer the following 3 questions. What could be reinforcing the behavior of not studying? So what could be going on at the library that is more rewarding or feels better than studying? Whatever that thing is, what might you do to stop reinforcing the behavior of not studying? And then finally, how can you rearrange the reinforcer of the undesired behavior? So whatever it is that happens at the library that is more entertaining, more interesting, more fun, more rewarding than actually studying. How can you take that and use it to, instead of reinforcing your bad behavior, reinforce your good behavior? So answer those 3 questions for lecture activity number 1. So an interesting thing about rewards is that studies show that using mediators, which are people that dispense the contingent consequences for you, or the people that give you the reward when you do the good behavior, studies show that using those types of people in your project, mediators, to dispense rewards actually makes long-term maintenance of the behavior much more likely. So the new good behavior really seems to stick with people when they have someone else giving them the rewards for their good behavior. So the top 3 ways that people use a mediator to dispense their rewards for good behavior is having the mediators give them money, permission, or praise. And so I'll give you an example of how you could use a mediator to dispense all 3 of these types of rewards. So for example, if you wanted to use a mediator to dispense money, and your self-change project was to study more, for example, you could give $100 to your friend or whoever you want your mediator to be, and whenever you study for an hour, you tell your friend and they give you $5 of that $100. If you wanted to use permission and your self-change project, for example, was to stop smoking, you could tell your yoga group to only give you permission to participate in the yoga class if you haven't smoked more than 5 cigarettes that day. And then an example of praise, really simple. Let's say you're just trying to eat healthier. You could tell your mediator that every time you eat healthy, you'll let them know, and then they should say good job to you, or you look great, or some type of positive feedback. So for lecture activity 2, I would like for you to tell me if you were to use this technique, hypothetically, and of course you don't have to use this technique when you do write your official plan for change, but as an option, if you did use this technique, who could be your mediator? And then tell me how you would have them dispense rewards to you and what type of reward would you use. So money, praise, or permission, how would they dispense that reward to you when you do your good behavior? And who would that person be for lecture activity 2? So other techniques of self-reinforcement or other reward systems include using token reinforcers. And token reinforcers are a symbolic reinforcer that can be converted to an actual reinforcement later. So it's important to note that if reinforcement cannot be immediate, this is really when we use token reinforcers. So let's say, for example, that for your self-change project, you are working on getting over social anxiety. And you decide that when you have a good social interaction, you're going to reward yourself with TV. But you can't run to watch TV every time you talk with someone. So you have to use a token. So each time you have a good interaction with someone, you give yourself a token, and when you get X amount of tokens, you trade that in for the actual reward. So tokens are kind of a placeholder that you give yourself, and when you collect a certain amount of them, then you get to exchange it for an actual reward. And they're used all the time in life. At arcades, you get the tickets and then you trade them in for a little prize. Those tickets constitute tokens. Your grades in school are actual rewards for the points, which are tokens. So you get points on assignments, and when you get a certain number of points, you get this letter grade, which is your actual reward. So we see them used all the time in real life, and they're a great option for self-reinforcement for your project as well, if you choose to use them. Another type of self-reinforcement is simply imagining a reward or reinforcer. So let's say that you are interested in losing weight. An imagined reinforcer would be thinking of yourself 6 months down the road after you've done your good behaviors of dieting and exercising and being healthy, and there you are standing on the beach looking wonderful in your bathing suit. And so that image of you looking wonderful in your bathing suit is the imagined reinforcer. So another type of reward or technique for self-reinforcement is called the self-control triad, and it works really well if you suffer from anxiety, negative thinking, panic attacks. And so what you do is, if you feel yourself having a lot of worry, that fight or flight response to anxiety, what you want to do is say the word stop, take a deep breath, and then imagine a reinforcing pleasant scene like the beach, or yourself having a beautiful hike, or whatever it is that is a pleasant space for you to go to mentally. So doing those three things constitutes the self-control triad. So another technique of self-reinforcement is verbal self-reinforcement, or positive affirmations, just talking nice to yourself. So you can tell yourself, good job, you can do it, you're awesome, you got this. Things like that when you do a good job. We spend so much time criticizing ourselves and speaking mean to ourselves and negatively and down, and, oh, you're so stupid, oh, you made that mistake. We very rarely take the time to pat ourselves on the back and say, good job, you're awesome, you got this. And so that can constitute an actually very powerful reward. So the next technique of self-reinforcement is kind of on a broader scale, but it's called response allocation, and it's based on the idea that the power to reduce some bad behavior or undesirable behavior is partly due to the total amount of pleasantness present in a person's field. So, for example, addicts are often only rewarding themselves with food or drugs, so it's really the only time they feel good in a day. And studies show that increasing positive experiences just in your day-to-day general living, it decreases drug use and overeating greatly. So the idea behind response allocation is just to try to create what psychologists call uplifts, which are little positive experiences throughout the day in your day-to-day life. And that ability to have access to rewards that are not contingent on doing your bad behavior increases your overall happiness, and that decreases your need to self-medicate or distract or whatever the reason is that you're doing your bad behavior. And then the last technique is to use what are called non-contingent reinforcers. And this is to, very much like response allocation, increase the positive, healthy events, but that are more specifically tied to your bad behavior. So where response allocation is just generally increasing your happiness by trying to have more positive experiences throughout the day, non-contingent reinforcers are about looking at the aspects of the bad behavior that felt good to you, but were healthy and not damaging to you in any way. So, for example, let's say that you like to go to the club and you're trying to stop drinking so much, so you can't go to the club in this project for right now, because we're not just going to stand in the face of temptation and see how we do, right? So we're trying to stay away from the club altogether so that we don't drink, but we miss dancing. We love to dance. That was part of the reason that we were going to the club, and so now you just don't have any time to dance. So what you could do then is take that reinforcer of dancing, and instead of it going hand in hand with your bad behavior of drinking, you could just try to increase your opportunities to dance. Sign up for a dance class or dance on the side of the road like this girl in the slide. Okay, so for lecture activity 3, I want you to look back on the list of possible reinforcers. They were token reinforcers, imagined reinforcers, self-controlled triad, verbal self-reinforcement, response allocation, or non-contingent reinforcers. And I'd like for you to choose one of those and tell me how you would use it in your project. Be very specific about when you would dispense the reward, how the reward would be given. If your reward involves you picturing a pleasant scene or something like that, describe it in detail. So help me to really understand how you're thinking you could use a reward system in your project. And it might not end up being what you actually do, but let's see what we can come up with today for lecture activity 3. Okay, so one of the things that we are hoping happens is what's called extinction. And it's a term that's used in classical conditioning, and it's the weakening of a behavior by withdrawing reinforcement from it. So if you remember the story of Pavlov, eventually his dogs stopped drooling to the sound of the bell because they weren't getting the food anymore, and they kind of caught on to the big picture, so to speak, and they were like, all right, if you're not going to give us food after you ring that bell, then there's really no reason for us to keep drooling. And the anticipation of getting the food was gone at that point, and so the behavior of drooling to the sound of the bell went extinct. So when we stop reinforcing our bad behaviors, what we usually see is that new behaviors rush in to fill their place. For example, you stop smoking, you've stopped your bad behavior, and then a new behavior of starting to overeat rushes in to fill the place of smoking. So we want to have a plan to prevent that, and we need to control the behaviors that are going to replace the old bad behavior, so that instead of overeating, we can start exercising after we quit smoking, and then we can reward the exercise. So when you withdraw reinforcement from your bad behavior, you should simultaneously try to increase reinforcement for the alternative desired behavior. So in short, you get rid of the bad behavior, you replace the bad behavior with a good behavior, and then you reward that good behavior. Sometimes students want to do punishment as a way to train themselves to stop doing their bad behavior. And research shows that punishment doesn't really work. It usually makes things worse. Punishment alone doesn't teach the new behavior that you should be doing instead of the bad behavior. And most people will not consistently punish themselves according to research. So we need that consistency when it comes to shaping a new behavior. And then if you use any form of punishment, like you absolutely have to use a form of punishment, then that punishment must be followed by a reinforcer. So you did your bad behavior of smoked, so for that you have to pay $20 to a charity. But scientists would say that if you're going to do that, if you're going to punish yourself in that way, then you must do something else that constitutes a reward ASAP. So, okay, you've punished yourself, you've given money to the charity, and now you tell yourself, all right, I'm going to go for a run, and after I go for a run, I'm going to give myself the reward of a nice hot bath or something like that. So even after punishment, there has to be an opportunity for reward. Okay, so on page 235 of your book in what is the 9th edition, I believe. I don't know what it is in the 10th edition, but it's somewhere in chapter 7. It talks about the ability to cheat on the reward system. For example, if you use a mediator to dispense money, you could easily lie to them and say you did your good behavior when you didn't and collect that reward. So find the page, if you don't have the 9th edition, that talks about restructuring so that cheating is less likely to be done. So read the section on cheating. And then what I'd like for you to do is identify a way to cheat using the reward system that you described in the last lecture activity. So how could you cheat that system so that you get a reward without doing your full-on good behavior? And then I want you to come up with a plan to prevent yourself from cheating in that way. Okay, and that is it for Chapter 7. So don't forget to submit all of your lecture activities to our class online, and also complete all of the assignments that are associated with this chapter. And I will see you on the next lecture activity. I hope you have a fantastic day.